BIT.TRIP Runner is a game consisting of two different genres. And I don't mean it's a little bit of one thing and a little bit of another thing appearing side by side, but still distinctly separate, like an FPS RPG. I mean this game's gameplay could easily be classified as being one genre or another. But it's actually both. It's both a rhythm game and a 2D platformer at the same time. It isn't enough of a 2D platformer to be called a 2D platformer, but it also makes a major departure from the rhythm game formula too. It's not quite one or the other, yet it's also clearly both. But whatever it is, it's fucking fantastic. It has very quickly become one of my very favourite games. The first thing you're probably going to need to be told is that this game is not for 95% of the people watching this. This game is a complete and utter bastard. There's a box quote for you. To put it another way, it's really hard. But it's not just hard, it's cruel. And 95% of you are not going to be interested in this game. If however you're in that 5%, that would be the 5% with the susceptibility to Stockholm Syndrome, you're going to adore this game. The 2D platformer does all kinds of wonderful things, but it ultimately amounts to very little more than holding right and tapping jump periodically. BIT.TRIP Runner is the ultimate purification of the idea, drawing on elements of the rhythm game as a means of cutting out all the fat of the platformer. Right, he collects shiny things, he jumps on and over stuff, and he avoids hazards and obstacles. At a glance it might look just like a 2D platformer. But what makes it not quite a platformer is that you don't have any control over your ability to move your guy. He runs in a fixed direction, at a fixed speed, and all you do is watch, then hit the right button at the right time to perform the right action. So as far as player input goes, BIT.TRIP Runner is pretty similar to Guitar Hero, except you're hitting way fewer buttons, not that that actually makes the game any easier. But at the same time there clearly are certain aspects of both the gameplay and the presentation that make it feel like a platformer. The 5-button controls are very simple. Space is jump, while the arrow keys control your other 4 abilities: sliding, springboarding, kicking, and blocking. Jumping lets you jump over low hazards or onto platforms. Sliding lets you slide under high hazards. Springboarding gives you a sort of a super jump, but uniquely out of your abilities it can only be performed at specific times. Kicking lets you destroy certain barriers, while blocking lets you shield yourself from beats, which are these little yellow blocks that want to kill you. Initially all you can do is jump. 3 of the other abilities are introduced over the course of the first world, while the final ability is introduced at the start of the third and final world. The way the abilities are staggered with tutorial levels dotted in between the regular levels does a good job of showing you exactly how to use your latest ability. The game grows at a good pace and despite the difficulty, never becomes overwhelming. So things start out fairly simple, but understand that I mean simple as opposed to complicated, not simple as opposed to challenging. The game is hard right from the start thanks to the death system. Unlike Guitar Hero and the like, where you can miss a whole bunch of notes before you die, in Runner you need only touch one hazard and it's back to the start of the level. There are no lives and no checkpoints. The game doesn't faff about with letting you get right back into the action after dying, so it's not overly tedious, but this zero tolerance approach is going to put off the majority of players, even those who really want to like it. It means that most levels amount to playing for 10 seconds, dying, restarting, playing for 16 seconds, dying, restarting, playing for 25 seconds, dying, restarting, and on and on. You'll die and restart over and over and get a little farther each time. But something I need to stress is that this game isn't played entirely by rote. There is definitely an element of that to it, but just as much as learning the level layouts, you need to learn techniques to deal with those layouts. Learning how to slide jump or jump kick properly is every bit as important as knowing what's waiting up ahead. This is definitely a game about memorization, but it's also very much about acquiring a skill set. Probably where memorization is most important is in the gold bar collecting. Getting all the gold bars in a level is ultimately how you master it, and there are 3 game difficulty levels based on the absence or mandatory collection of the bars, which is frankly redundant. If you manage to collect all the gold bars in a level, you're treated to 1 attempt at that level's bonus level. These bonus levels look pretty much like old school classic Pitfall with plain textureless 2D graphics. These levels don't have the same kind of creative design as the regular levels, and they aren't music based, which is something I'll get to later, but the gameplay is about the same as the regular levels. They're extra hard, which is always nice, and the visuals pay homage to important games and developers of yesteryear, so while their presence is not a huge boon, it's very cool to see. I broadly classify games as being either fun or satisfying. The fun games are stuff like Team Fortress 2 or the GTA series, while the satisfying games are more things like EverQuest or the Total War series. Runner, interestingly, is both, being first the latter, then the former. Dying and restarting over and over is not very fun, but if you stick with it and you keep going and you learn and master the techniques needed to make it through a level, being able to finally do it is immensely satisfying. It's like, to use a very on-topic analogy, like running a marathon. Running a marathon is not fun at all, not even a little bit. But getting to the finish line is an amazing feeling, a tremendously satisfying feeling. It's hard and grueling and painful, but crossing the finish line is just as satisfying as it gets. And that's exactly what Runner feels like. Games today are all about pandering to casuals and kids, and are all about instant gratification and rewarding people for accomplishing nothing. Back in the good old days of gaming, being able to complete a game wasn't a foregone conclusion. It was very much a matter of if rather than when. And BIT.TRIP Runner really espouses that philosophy. It's tremendously satisfying to have earned the right to be good at a game through your hard work. And it's such a pleasure to play a game like that today, especially one that began its life on the Wii of all places. But then there is the other side to it, the fun side. Going back and replaying a level after mastering it is super fun. Taking every jump and slide and perfectly making it through the levels, collecting all the pickups and getting the highest score is completely exhilarating and just super fun. And best of all, you've actually earned it. You've earned the right to be good at the level. And yet the levels are still challenging regardless of your degree of mastery of them because of the death system. So even in mastering a level, it doesn't feel trivial, which ultimately gives the game enormous replay value. I do have one issue with the difficulty though. The last two levels of World 1 are much harder than they have any right to be, and that's going to put off even more players. The game's difficulty curve looks like this. In fact, looking at the Steam achievements, only 20% of players have made it onto World 2, which is where the game starts to become great. You can kind of consider those really tough levels a rite of passage, and it further plays into the whole overcoming the challenge thing. But really, it's called a difficulty curve for a reason, and making it so hard so early on in the game is a poor choice. So as I said, things start out very simple. To begin with, it's jump, 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 jump. But a few hours in, it's jump, slide, jump kick, block, slide jump block, springboard, jump, jump, slide, kick, slide, jump kick, and so on. And the way the game builds is mostly really pretty good. Although I said earlier the game is pretty similar to Guitar Hero in terms of player input, BIT.TRIP Runner does make one fairly substantial departure from the more traditional rhythm game formula. With the exception of springboards, the game doesn't actually tell you when to perform certain actions. In typical rhythm games you're told to press the green button now, press the yellow button now, press the red button now, and so on and so forth, and then you perform like a mechanised lapdog. Runner totally turns the idea on its head by not giving you button press prompts, but rather by giving you obstacles that you have to navigate. And although obviously there's a specific action associated with each obstacle, and indeed there's a specific optimum time to perform the action, the game doesn't tell you either of these. It leaves it up to you to choose which action to perform, and when. So for instance, when you see a hazard that you have to jump over, the game doesn't tell you when to jump over it, and it also doesn't tell you that you have to jump at all. It just shows you the hazard. This adds an extra step in the process of playing the game, which makes you feel much more involved. Rather than seeing the green prompt and knowing to press the green button when it tells you, you see the hazard, have to associate that hazard with jumping, then have to pick and time your jump based on your own initiative. There is in a sense much more freedom in it, you feel much more involved, and it makes BIT.TRIP Runner feel like a much more fully rounded gameplay experience than the button tapping simulators known as rhythm games. But Runner does stay true to the best bits of its rhythm game lineage, in as much as this is a game about making music. That may seem a little weird to look at the game, but it's totally true, and executed masterfully, which shouldn't come as a surprise if you played earlier BIT.TRIP games like BIT.TRIP Beat. Each level has a background beat, and for every successful action you perform, you get a sound effect. By successful, I mean, for instance, you have to jump over a specific hazard to get the sound, rather than just indiscriminately jumping for no reason, which gives no sound. And through these sound effects, coupled with the background beats, you're making the music as you play. And it's beautiful. It's truly beautiful. In addition to the gold bar collectibles you find in the levels as I mentioned earlier, there are also special pickups that really affect the music. These special pickups are score multipliers, which anyone who's played a previous BIT.TRIP game will possibly recognise. They take you through ranks called Hyper, Mega, Ultra, and Extra. As you move up through each rank, you get a cool sparkly effect that follows your character. The background beat changes, and the sound effects associated with your actions changes. The music builds in a really fantastic way, and it perfectly reflects the increasing tension you feel as you get closer to the end and things become more intense. But the last collectible is unique. Once you get this, the sparkly effect around your character is replaced by a rainbow cloak, and the music becomes utterly serene and euphoric, and the sound effects become muted and distant, and it just perfectly reflects that sense that you're in the zone and hitting every note like a pro, and visually and audibly it reflects your mastery. It's just awesome. Of course, it would all be for nothing unless the level design is there, and it's definitely there. World 1 has its issues, as I said, but after that things become fantastic. The game does a great job of theming levels around particular refrains like slide jumping or jump blocking. Many levels feel like they're split into verses and choruses. You'll actually find it easier to master certain techniques by playing by ear rather than by eye. The level design is excellent both in terms of gameplay and in facilitating the creation of music. It's a pretty singular achievement. The fact that the levels are split down into worlds is that each world has its own extremely unique aesthetic, with only a few assets appearing in more than one world. The stack change of appearance keeps everything very interesting, but also the change of assets makes it feel like you're learning to play the game all over again. In World 1 for instance, your kick move is used to smash through crystals, while in World 2 it's wooden barriers, and in World 3 it's a pile of cardboard boxes. And this may seem like a totally superficial change, but because you have to learn to associate the right actions with each type of hazard, it really is a new learning experience each time you start a new world. Other ideas are introduced too, such as the mobile spring hazard in World 2. If you run into it, you die, but if you jump on top of it, you spring off to collect higher items. That little fellow has a pretty huge impact on the gameplay. And at the start of World 3 there's the new blocking move introduced. It's really great how the game grows more elaborate over its length, which is actually fairly considerable by the way. I've spent over 10 hours playing it so far. Not bad for £7, but as you may imagine much of that has been dying and restarting over and over again. Runner is definitely not a game for everyone. I love it passionately, but if I scored individual aspects of games and one of those aspects was general appeal, Runner would be getting a -5. To call it a niche title is an understatement. Its steep difficulty and trial and error gameplay are going to put off most people, but it has become one of my very favourite games. It's extremely satisfying to master levels and super fun to play them once you have, and the music is an absolute pleasure to not just experience, but also help create. If you're easily frustrated, this is definitely not a game for you, but if you have a good tolerance for pain, I simply cannot recommend this game enough.